Hey guys, Julian here, and today I'm showing you how to make disco tech house like Brame Hamo. We're going to be talking about that sort of like modern version of disco house that's also very intertwined with the current sound of tech house, and sort of breaking down how all this stuff works. As usual, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video right at the top of the description, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. And yeah, so this is a little from the intro. It's 124 BPM, so already like pretty standard house, disco, and tech house sort of tempo. The first sound we have here is the sample chop, which sounds like this. So the way this is made is by taking this disco sample, and I'll actually go, basically what I've done here is I had 4 chops. I have this one, this one, and then this one, and this one. So yeah, I took those and then I pitched some of them up. I didn't actually end up using all of them. Some of these are just, yeah, like I only used sample chop 1, 2, and then 4 right at the end. But all 4 of these are included with the sample pack right at the top of the description. And yeah, so this is what you want to start with, is you find a sample and chop it up and just listen through the track and find maybe like 2 or 3 or 4 little phrases that you really like. And I also want to talk a little bit about finding samples. I know that can be a tough thing. A lot of people have asked me about that as well. The way I'd recommend that you go about finding samples, the way that I usually find samples when I make these kinds of tracks, is the site called Who Sampled. And what you can do is find, just find like whichever samples you like. Like in this case, find like which samples Brame Hamo are using, or maybe find, whatever disco house track, the sample that you really like, figure out what that is, and then just listen to the album that sample comes from. Like, figure out, what that album is online, all the information about it, and listen to it. And chances are, if there's one really good sample that was already used to make a banger, there's another really good one that's just as good on the record that nobody's ever heard. A lot of these records are things that were just kind of like one-offs back in the day that, like, aren't really, not super well documented, but you can just go and find a really dope sample. Like, there's a million dope samples out there that exist that nobody's touched before, and they're sitting on these albums that have samples that are really popular that people just haven't checked the other songs from. So that's how I'd recommend finding samples. And then once you find your sample, like I said, you just take these little chops here, again, maybe like anywhere between like 2 and 5 different phrases that you like. If you start to find too many, like if you go through the track and you have like 10 or 15 or something like that, you're going to have a hard time structuring your track because it's just going to be like too much in one place to kind of like actually handle it. But I'd say like, up to like 5 different chops is a pretty good sweet spot. And then once you have those, you can just kind of pitch them, get them all in the same key. And then there you go, you just start chopping it around. So that's what I did here. I took this first one. So that plays all the way through. And then I took the second chop. And then I just took that last chord there. And then I grabbed it again right there. And then this little like phrase right here that you see is actually this sample chop 4. It's right at the end of that. So there we go, I just took that as like a cool little transitional element. And there you go, now we have the school pattern where, it says a lot because this is going through many chords. And then it's going to come really nicely back to the start and loop back around again. The most ideal thing I think in this style is if you can just make it sound like this is just a live band playing, and they're just constantly going, and it doesn't sound like such an obvious loop. And this is a really great way to do that, just kind of taking little chops at the end there to make it kind of fit. So yeah, that is how I actually did the sample chopping. Again, it's not hard, you just have to really be like mindful of what you're doing. Now, the other thing that's really important for these samples is the effects that you put on them. And the reason why is because if we just play this dry, like, I'll play it you'll see what I'm talking about. It's just not really gonna hold up. You know, and even if we try to turn this up, it still just isn't quite full enough as it is like when we put this on. So that's where this stuff comes in. So yeah, the main thing here is really just like using like some pretty standard saturation to beef it up a lot. You can see this is hitting pretty hard. I have a little bit of compression on here actually as well. Here's without that. And with it, it's a subtle compression, which you can hear it helps to kind of flatten out the sample a little bit. That helps. Again, you don't want this to be entirely flat. You still want to have some dynamics there. But this can help to kind of bring out the sample, because like without this, you're really just getting like the transients hitting really hard, and then everything in between, like the drum hits and the percussion, is a little bit quieter. But then when we turn this on, again, it's just helping to kind of even out the sample and make sure everything is like an even volume for making sure that it's going to fit well into the overall track. And yeah, then I have this high pass filter and this EQ. So the high pass is just cutting out some lows, and then I'm cutting out a little bit of mud with this EQ. Typically, if you cut out like this range, like around 200 hertz, is really good, because a lot of times these samples can have a bit of mud in them, especially just like, you know, just old recording techniques, all that kind of stuff. It tends to have a lot of like stuff in that range that you need to clean out, because that's going to get in the way of the bass and the kick and stuff like that. So we're just cutting that. I have a high boost as well, you can see, just to kind of bring out some of those highs that are decking off there. And then finally I just have a compressor side chaining it to the kick. And the side chain is really important with this style. You know, you really want it to be like bouncing off of the kick. That's what's creating the groove. If it's just kind of sitting, you know, it's not as groovy. And then the key here is just not to do too much like this. No, that's way too much. But if you just do it like this, it's the perfect amount where you still get the sample, but you feel the side chain. And yeah, then after that, we have the low end bus. So this is made up of two things. We have this kick, just like your standard really fat tech house, disco house sort of 909 style kick. I've got it going through some drum bus as well to give it even more punch. And then we have this bass line, which sounds like this. So this is the bass line to the track. Typically, a lot of times, like what people do, I've done this a lot before, when you use a sample like this, is, you know, you would just take it and then filter out the high end. And then there's your bass line. But here, I actually wrote a bass line because I noticed a lot of people doing this a bit more in the more modern tracks and the more recent tracks in this style. And the way that you do this is you just take your sample and then just write like a bass line to it. Like in my case, what I did was I sat here and I just listened to it like this. And you can hear the bass line from the original sample. And then as you can hear, I just basically followed that with the notes of the bass line. And yeah, it's not that hard to actually write a bass line like this. But this way, you're going to have something that kind of feels a little bit more like an instrument that somebody's playing, rather than like a piece of the sample. So yeah, here's the MIDI on that. You can see it's not that crazy. It's like a pretty standard disco sort of chord progression where it just goes like G, and then up to the 4th C, and then back, and then just walks its way back down. Not really that complicated in terms of notes. Again, you just really have to go through with the sample and just like figure out what they were doing in terms of the bass and that, and then replay it, you know, add some little changes here and there, and there you go. And then with the sound with this one, I have this guitar bass operator patch here, so this is just meant to sound like an actual like live bass. Which, as you can hear, it does a pretty good job of. It's just this FM patch. You can see it's got the saw wave 4 and then 3 sine waves here, just doing FM. We have this FM algorithm. I've got the filter on there as well with, as you can see, it's not actually doing anything. And then that LFO as well, which is just slowly moving the pitches like really subtly. It's not doing a whole lot. But yeah, like I said, you know, this is just meant to sound like a live bass guitar. And then I had this going through a drum bus to beef it up a bit and make it a really full and fat sounding bass and really give it that extra like boost to sound live because of the warmth and texture. And then finally I just have a compressor, which is sidechaining this one to the kick, just like the sample. This one's sidechained a little bit more since the kick and bass are really grooving together. And yeah, and then on the group of the kick and bass, you know, I just have a little bit of saturation. A little bit goes a long way here. So here's without this. And then with it, doesn't need much, but it's just that little boost to make it really like punch through the mix and really glue the kick and the bass together at once. And then after that we have the percussion. So the first thing here would be the clap and snare together, which sound like this. So these are pretty simple. It's just a clap. And then this nice boomy snare, you can see they're both just going through a bit of drum bus. The snare is going through a high pass filter as well. And then I just have those playing together. So the snare is a nice actually thing with the style. It gives it a more like disco feel, I think. You know, versus just using a clap. It's not quite as boomy. So that's the idea behind that. And then the other percussion here, it's just this little sample that's like that's just adding some groove because you're hearing that. Really simple percussion, and then that's all just going through a bit of saturation and a high pass filter. Just kind of gluing it all together, just like how the saturator on the low end bus did that. And yeah, and then after that we have this percussion group down here with all the hi-hats. And so, we've got a pretty standard sort of hi-hat section here. The main thing to keep in mind is just it's like the little small things that you're going to do that are going to make the big difference with this style. Typically, with these types of tracks, you're not just going to have like, you know, a hi-hat and then a clap and then another hi-hat playing 16th notes and then maybe like one percussion. Typically, you have to kind of add some layers of some sort of unorthodox and extra different things that you wouldn't usually do, but what that's going to add is texture, and it's going to make it feel like a loop. Like, you know, if we go through sample packs, like, I have this one here, like, Vengeance Essential House Volume 1, for example, like, if we go through these house loops here, like, you'll see what I'm talking about, like, you hear how, you know, that's not just like a hi-hat and a clap. There's more to that. There's a there's that happening under the surface. There's a shaker, there's a programmed shaker, there's a hi-hat, you see like a lot of stuff is actually going into making these really textured loops like you hear in these tracks. You know, even like this one, like it's minimal, but you hear how much stuff is happening. And so this, I'm going to show you how to recreate this type of effect and really like have, you know, that more interesting feel and have it actually feel like, you know, an exciting animated thing rather than just over and over, because with this style that's not going to work so well. So the name of the game here is just having like little subtle things, because you can see we have some main elements here that are pretty like pretty straight up, you know, just like a tambourine, and then this hi-hat, which is just layered with this one for some punch. That's all pretty simple, but then we add in this ride here and having that every single time the ride just so that's an example of one of those kinds of things that's going to add the more loopy sort of feel. And the other thing that I have in here for that is this other hi-hat. So we're hearing our main hi-hat like that, and then now there's this. We have a underneath it, and you may not even hear that right away when you're hearing the track, but you are actually hearing it and you're feeling it more than anything, because you're getting underneath the whole track, and just that alone is adding like a lot of groove. And then same deal with that ride, you know, having that every single time. This is how you do it. Again, when you hear these loops and you hear these tracks in the style, you know, like all that stuff that's happening in there. this is what they're doing, and this is how you do that on your own, so you don't have to just use loops. But yeah, so it's actually not that crazy. You really just have to add some extra stuff and be kind of smart about how you're laying it out so that it's all playing off of each other and it feels really alive and animated like that. And then on the group of those hi-hats, I just have a bit of reverb and some drum bus and a high pass. So here's without these. And then with them, so you can see the reverb's just giving everything some space. This helps to also kind of make everything feel really together because it's putting it all sort of in the same room. Then we have the drum bus, which is just gluing it all together, making it all hit more. And also bringing up the volume levels to a more even place so everything is kind of in the same place. And then finally just the high pass filter to cut out the lows, because oftentimes, adding saturation to hi-hats like this can make them very big and fat, but it's also going to add some low end sometimes, so this is just cutting that out. And yeah. And yeah, so that's me for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. And let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, all that stuff from this video. It's available right at the top of the description on my Bandcamp for just $5. And if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. Thank you so much, guys, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.